Hi, I'm Lizzie, here with my friend Andrea, and we are your hosts for Letting It Percolate. Just as the best tasting coffee takes time to percolate, some of life's most interesting and important questions take time to truly explore.
So today's episode is going to have two parts. We'll start by asking the question, what exactly happens in therapy? And we'll finish with some of our reflections on the process of making, on the process of making Letting It Percolate. And so, kind of to begin this episode, at least the first half of it, Lizzie's going to share a little bit about her personal experience in counseling, in therapy. So, Lizzie, I'll go ahead and pass it off to you.
So we are just going to briefly kind of share our perspectives as clients who have been, people who have been in therapy before. We could probably talk, at least I could talk for a long time about what counseling has been like and the weird parts of it, but also the super helpful parts of it. But our hope in sharing just brief snippets from each of our experiences is to maybe demystify counseling if someone has never experienced it, and also just to open up that conversation and normalize that. So I have a lot of experience as a client. I went to individual therapy for the first time when I was like 19. And so I've gone through like private practitioners, and then when I was at IU, I also utilized the College Health Center. And then after IU, I did this, what's called PHP, Partial Hospitalization Program, for a couple weeks, which is like group therapy. So a few different types of experiences. And I remember when I first started counseling, first of all, I think I shared this in like our second episode when I talked about my mental health more in depth, but like I had a lot of stigma about mental health that I was completely unaware of, and I maybe had some stigma about like counseling, and so I was initially like slightly resistant to the idea that I needed to go to counseling, but I went and I remember like expecting it to be basically like I sit down and I like word vomit my problems and they give me advice, and like,
did you at any point picture laying down on a couch? Because I feel like a lot of people have that mental image.
Yeah,
like Sigmund Freudian.
Yeah, I did not picture that, but I think that's a super common image. I feel like most therapy offices try to be really like comfy because it's like you're going to be going through a hard thing probably emotionally, so at least your physical environment can be comfy. So I've been on a couch, but like a normal couch, like sitting upright. Anywho, so I just thought like it'll like quickly fix things, I'll get advice. And what I learned throughout my different like experiences as a client is that counseling is much more like teaching me to learn how to think differently, and that applies broadly to different scenarios as opposed to learning specific answers for like my problems. And it's also notable to say that like the problem of depression doesn't have a specific answer. Like it's so multifaceted. So, other elements that I've experienced, just like, I remember being worried about like, am I supposed to prepare stuff? Like, what if I run out of things to say? Like, what's my counselor gonna do? Like, what's the structure gonna be? And some people that I've seen are more transparent with like, I'm going to be doing CBT and this is kind of what it's going to look like. CBT being cognitive behavior therapy. Or I'm going to be doing whatever sort of structured therapy. Or we're going to take elements of your past week or your life in general and process them. Whereas others, it's been much more go with the flow and maybe like man behind the curtain sort of thing. Like I didn't know exactly what was going on. And I definitely appreciated the ones that were more transparent personally. And then let's see what else. So like with my mental health, it just shifted so much in terms of like when I was really struggling and when I was doing good or felt like myself. And so sometimes sessions would fall on weeks where I felt like totally great and like felt like myself. And I was like, well, maybe I don't have, like, is it going to be useless or irrelevant to go to therapy this week if I'm already, you know, doing great? So that was interesting to navigate as well. Felt like it was still useful, but it's just very, very hard when you're doing well to put yourself in the mindset of when you're not doing well in a meaningful way, at least for me.
Did you ever have a relationship with your therapist where you could, like, I guess where they were on call, or like you could reach out to them in the times that, like, for example, if you were having a really bad week but you hadn't scheduled therapy that week, did you ever have that kind of dynamic with anyone, or was it pretty strictly like either we're meeting and we're talking in our meeting or we're not meeting kind of thing?
Never an on-call sort of thing. Like I've never had like my counselor, a different, like various counselors, like cell phone numbers, for example. But, I mean, there are ways to, like, at least what I've experienced, to schedule a quicker session, or like one earlier than had originally been scheduled. But I guess it's been fairly structured, like, yeah.
Yeah, okay, gotcha.
But overall, I'm not in counseling right now, but I want to get a counselor in like the near-ish future, for various reasons. But one of the biggest things I appreciate about counseling is, for me, like, I can be like somewhat emotional, and I often feel the need to temper that even with close friends at times. But the therapy space is specifically designed so that it's like I can just let loose if necessary, and like it's a safe space, and I'm not going to, like, well, my counselor might feel overwhelmed, but like that's her job. So I've really appreciated just having that space where it's like, okay, I can totally just let it all out. And I think also the other main thing is learning the basic skills of counseling, so like coping skills, and within CBT there's like cognitive distortions such as black and white thinking, and other similar like building blocks. Just learning those and being able to put words to them for me has been super, super helpful. So
thanks for sharing that. So yeah, if you started when you were 19, so you've had, what, almost 8 years, like, obviously in seasons.
Right, yeah, not constant.
Like, not constant, but you've also experienced a lot of different modes of therapy, and I'm kind of almost envious. I don't know, maybe that's a weird thing to say, but my experience is more limited in terms of like the mode. So I think it's cool that you've gotten exposure to like group therapy and the other forms you mentioned too. So yeah, I guess just to share, hopefully pretty briefly, about my experience as a client in counseling. So touching on what I just mentioned, I have always been in a one-on-one setting, with one exception. I did like a intensive counseling retreat. It's technically like I was the one being counseled, the only one, but I went with like a mentor, like a support partner. I don't know exactly what to call her, but and then there was also someone shadowing the counselor I was meeting with. So there were actually 4 of us in the room. That was a really cool experience because they were able to like chime in with their perspectives on things that either I or the counselor maybe didn't see, like some of the patterns or me using a certain word a lot of times or something. But yeah, otherwise it's been pretty strictly one-on-one in like an office. Normally a comfortable office though, like you said. Like normally there are nice pillows and blankets, and the lighting isn't too bright, and it really makes a difference. It honestly does. So yeah, a few things came to mind when I was reflecting on my counseling experiences, and I am in counseling actively right now too, so that helps a bit. I think every time the way it started out is, Andrea, like, tell me what your goals are. Why are you here? And that's normally pretty easy for me to get to just because I'm naturally goal oriented, and so I like framing counseling around goals. But I will say, in my experience, it's not been like okay, today we're going to focus on this goal and we're going to work toward it. It's been this big hodgepodge, like, mixed bag, and sometimes we'll return to the goals and, like, remember, okay, this is what we were working toward, but it's not like you're running a marathon and when you get to the end of 13.1 miles, you've arrived. It's just a lot more ambiguous, and I think that's okay. Something that's really been helpful to me in counseling is being able to say out loud the things that are in my head, or sometimes being like subtly forced to say the things out loud that are in my head. Gently
encouraged.
Encouraged, there it is. Encouraged. I'm a pretty internal processor, and I'm kind of comfortable just keeping everything in my head, so it does have to be drawn out sometimes. And so that's been helpful. And also just hearing someone else's affirmation, or if there's a point of understanding, like if they can understand why it is that I believe something or how I got to a place, and then point that out to me, like, oh, it makes sense that you would have responded like this because of this. That's really helpful, and I've appreciated that. And yeah, I guess the other big thing that has been positive in my counseling experiences is an opportunity to reframe issues. I don't know, maybe we're all like this, but I sometimes just see things really one way. Like, well, because I had this certain outburst with a family member, I am an angry person, and kind of like anger is who I am, and so that is a little bit more of a black and white way of seeing it. And I want to be careful, because what I'm not saying here is that in counseling people have just like tried to make me feel better when I've made a mistake, like, oh, don't feel bad about yourself, you shouldn't feel guilty, but helping me to clarify where are the places that I should feel like it's right to feel guilt because I've messed up, and where are the places that maybe I've put guilt upon myself because of my own standard that's literally just like nothing, like it's meaningless, it's just something in my head that I decided, if that makes sense. That's been helpful. Like a specific case where I've worked through that recently is with introversion and extroversion. Even though I talked about this on an episode toward the beginning of our season about how those are morally neutral things, there's not a good and a bad, it's just a spectrum, but I still fight that. Like, there's so much in me that wants to be an extrovert, and I'm just not, and when I try, I burn myself out, and people can see it. But recently I kind of discovered with my counselor, I'm really introverted. Like, I'm not even just by the line, I'm really introverted. I need a lot of alone time to recharge. And when I'm not protecting that, I go into social situations like exhausted before they've started and not enjoying them. And so I've been working on like how do I advocate for my alone time and for my like quiet mental space and that kind of thing, and just not seeing those as good and bad, like not seeing it bad to be introverted has been helpful. It's enabled me to start to practice opening up with people like, hey, I'm not mad, I literally just need some time alone, and then I'll be very happy to talk to you. So yeah, all of those things have been takeaways from my personal counseling experience, and yeah, just really good stuff that I'm thankful for the opportunity to work through.
I wanted to comment on what you said about like the counselor helping you maybe understand like or connect dots between, oh, you had this and that experience in the past, and maybe that's connected to what you're currently reacting to, and just kind of like building those pieces of understanding. I think that's a huge piece of just like fundamentally what a lot of counseling at least is about. And I guess this is like tangentially connected, but one of my supervisors at an internship in grad school where I was working in a college counseling center, she kind of like framed the concept of therapy as like the client is navigating, like walking through a dark cave. And so it's like their cave, and so they know it, and like they're maybe the expert in the cave, but it's dark, and so the therapist like has a flashlight to kind of show like what's each next step. And that flashlight is just like the therapist's training and expertise. So I thought that was a interesting way to conceptualize it.
Yeah. I would affirm that. Like, that's what it feels like. That's what has felt like to me. And I would add too, like, obviously you're really early in your practice, and I think there are benefits to working with someone who maybe can relate more, like, age-wise or, like, generationally. And I'd say I've kind of had across the board in terms of ages, but my current counselor is, like a few generations ahead, I guess I would say. And she's been counseling for, I think, about 30 years.
Wow.
And so having counseled for that long, she just has this wealth of, like, knowledge of patterns, awareness of patterns, because she's seen human beings in, like, specific but also kind of zoomed out ways, or she's able to zoom out on all of the specifics of her individual clients and see the patterns form. And so I think that's hugely beneficial, because I don't have that kind of life experience, and I'm not meeting with people talking about their like issues and challenges regularly like she is. And so I think that's part of the value in, like, paying to go to counseling over maybe just like getting advice from a friend or self-help books or something like that. And neither of those things I'm, like, discouraging, but I just think it's hard to beat 30 years of watching people in counseling settings work through their problems. There's just a lot of understanding that comes from that.
Yeah, that connects to, I was gonna say, just as you mentioned, I'm a therapist, but I just got my MSW like a year ago, so pretty limited experience thus far. But I've noticed through my, like, practical experiences in grad school as, like, a intern therapist, and also in my current job, like, teaching, there's a certain element of counseling that can be more like teaching. So, like, psychoeducation, like, I'm going to help you understand, like, about the brain or about human behavior, like, things that you do just have to learn. You have to be taught. So there's, like, a teaching element, but there's also, like, a guidance element, like we've mostly been focusing on. But I've noticed being the one in the person who's doing the teaching and doing the guiding, it's helped me internalize some of those, like, lessons that I said I've learned as a client. So much more than if I had not been a therapist. Like, it's helping. I think, like, you talked about life experience with this woman having 30 years of, like, work experience as a counselor, which that in and of itself would be impressive. But then, like, you think about, that's, like, however many hundreds of clients she's had all of their lives. Like, in a sense, she almost has elements of that many life experiences in some way that she can, like, weave together, like you said, and see patterns. So maybe I'll get there someday. We'll see. But I think we also kind of wanted to just really quickly work through some questions people might have about, like, counseling that I might be able to speak into, given, again, limited experience, but things like worrying about your counselor judging you, depending, you saying something, like, that you think is off the wall. And, like, have you ever had that or other, like, worries, Andrea, regarding, like, your counselor?
Definitely. I'm not going to say that actually, but I have definitely asked myself, like, is my counselor judging me? Will they judge me if I say this thing? And I can think of a few instances, and like with specific counselors, that there's some stuff I did not share that I was willing to share with others. And I think even if it wasn't like super conscious, it was fear of being judged or like condemned versus accepted and like receiving grace. Like still great counselors, but, and you know, I guess maybe it's important for me to say that's my perspective. It could totally be the case that none of them were ever judging or would have judged, and but yes. No, yeah. I have asked this question.
Yeah,
and wondered.
I think you raised like a really good point that is important to like acknowledge that there are bad counselors out there. Like there's a whole spectrum from like straight up harm that is being caused because of non-evidence-based therapies being implemented, or like straight up malpractice and quackery to someone who's like, maybe not mature or not developed themselves, or they're a counselor who hasn't themselves been to therapy, which a lot of programs require that for good reason. So like maybe they're not self-developed and that can cause harm to the client. And then the other end of the spectrum that I think we've both experienced is like a wise counselor and a good counselor. So like there is a total like that happens. I think the other end of the spectrum of like malpractice and that is hopefully less common, but important to acknowledge that like that unfortunately that's out there, just as with any practice. But yeah, I know.
What about?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. After you.
Oh, the chivalry.
I try.
I was just gonna say, like, I think it's almost ironic in a way for like 99.999% of people who end up coming into counseling, and the thing that they're most nervous about sharing because they're most insecure about it, or worried that it's weird, or that they're going to be judged or something. Like, you're talking to someone who, like, for a living listens to people's weird stuff. Like,
oh, that's so true.
So it's likely that you're not going to be judged in this particular setting. Like, maybe you would be among your friends or among other groups, sadly. But it's, I would say, in some ways least likely to occur, that sort of judgment from a therapist, from a good therapist at least.
Yeah, you know, they've probably heard just about everything, especially, you know, if they've been practicing for a while. So you make a great point. Not that we should only be vulnerable in situations where we're pretty confident we won't be judged.
Right.
But at least, like, to know this is a setting where it's a safe space. They'll probably be understanding on the other side. And, like, I kind of feel like counselors have one of the more accurate depictions of how broken and messed up humanity is than a lot of professions. Feel free to disagree on that, but because they're hearing a lot of people's, like, deepest, darkest stuff that they're trying to work through, and past regrets and mistakes and all of that, like, they're probably not really that shocked to find out what humans and what we are capable of, or what we, you know, like, what we think and what we've done. So, I don't know, there's some, like, weird comfort in that as well.
Agreed. Yeah.
What about the question that you touched on when you're talking about being a client? What if I run out of things to say? From your perspective as a therapist, do you feel obligated to fill time if there's silence? How have you handled that when it's happened so far with your clients?
So if that happens, like my first thought is like, what's going on? Like, are they nervous but like have things to say but are nervous and need like maybe, like you said, to be drawn out? Or are they like avoiding, like relating to the topic of trauma? Like, are they avoidance is a key like symptom of trauma. Are they avoiding something that's uncomfortable to talk about? Or are we nearing the end of the therapeutic relationship and they really just don't have anything else to say? And like, we're going to be closing out soon. Like, it depends on the answers to those questions, how I would like go about that in session. But I would say that when clients that I've had have been quieter or like stop talking, like it doesn't freak me out. Like, that's just kind of part of the process of the therapy session. And I think there's a space for silence strategically, but also exploring like, what is this about? Like, are you just what I said of those other questions and exploring that with the person. So to me, like from the perspective of a therapist, now that if I could go back and tell my younger self, like, I feel like it's very normal and not a problem. Like, that's kind of like the therapist's job, is to like take it from there. Now, if the issue is they're not putting in effort into therapy, like the therapist is working way harder than the client at like trying to talk about things or work through things, then that's a different sort of problem. And that can be talked about and worked through as well within the session. But yeah.
Is that frustrating to you if you feel like you're trying to make someone talk?
I don't ever feel like I'm trying to make someone talk, because I've kind of acquiesced. Like, people are going to do what they're going to do. So if they're coming to a session and they're not talking, I'm going to do my job to explore those questions that I've already stated and provide a therapeutic space and a safe space to open up. But if they simply don't want to open up, like, maybe we can do a mindfulness coloring activity together, silently. Like, maybe that could be therapeutic. And, you know, if it's a repeated thing, then that's like, again, that should be explored deeper. But, yeah, I don't feel like I'm making people do things, generally speaking.
I have a hunch, feel free to weigh in on this. I have a hunch that most people could talk for most of their therapy sessions, like could fill most of the time. I'm sometimes...
Yeah, and that's like almost always the case.
That's what I was suspecting. I'm often surprised at myself. I can think of a few more recent sessions where I just didn't have something like pressing I need to say for a few minutes, and so my counselor just talked. But yeah, I'm often surprised at how much I talk. And, you know, I don't want to get us too off track, but I do think now more than ever, like, we're not as great as a society at like slowing down and listening to someone and like letting them feel heard. It seems like there's, and I totally do it too, like there's always a phone within reach, or we're like making dinner while we're talking to them on the phone. There's just like efficiency, like the desire for that creeps in, and just distraction. Like sometimes I just feel distracted. And so I think it's unique and important to guard the space that is counseling as a time when someone's attention is totally on the client. And I sense that meets a deep need in us as humans to feel like we're heard. Not even to have our problems resolved sometimes, just to feel heard by another human. So, yeah, I think that's a good thing about counseling.
Yeah. The last quick thing that has come up, some of my clients currently are content to bring this directly to my face.
Directly to my face.
Like, the question, like, the counseling relationship is unique in terms of, like, all human relationships for many reasons, the primary of which being it's very one-sided. So, like, if your client, hopefully, if you have a good counselor, you're not just like in a friendship with your counselor to where you know what your counselor is doing that night and you know all your counselor's friends and like, you know, your counselor's problems. Like, it's a specifically designed relationship that's about the client. And so the counselor, and there's a range within this, but the counselor largely is like supposed to not self-disclose too much. And so that for some people that can feel very uncomfortable because it is totally not normal in the context of like the rest of their relationships in their life. And so I've had clients just like ask me a bunch of personal questions like, well, what are you doing tonight? And how are you doing? Because I'll be like, hey, how's it going? When I first like show up at someone's place. And they'll be like, good, how are you? I'm like, what were you up to last night? I was like, you know, it's not about me.
Is that what you say? Like what?
What I say depends on my, like, on the context, but I do so because I work in the home-based world, meaning I meet clients in their homes, there is a bit more self-disclosure that ends up happening. And I know I'm not, like, I know other people on my supervisor's team do this too. Because it's just so much more of an intense setting than outpatient, like in an office. And so I'll say random things, but I really restrict what I actually share about like any friendships or relationships or family relationships or any of that, because at the end of the day, like, they don't need to know and worry and think about that. Like, what if I share something about my family and then they're processing something with like family drama and they have to worry about how it'll impact me? Like, that's completely inappropriate for the counseling relationship. So I usually deflect. Or if they're a kid, I'll say, I don't answer questions about myself. I can be even more direct with children because they're like, oh, okay.
No,
because they're still being socialized.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's good to acknowledge, like, it is weird. It is like totally unique. There's likely no other relationship in your life where it's almost, the counselor is not entering in the same way by design.
And if that kind of relationship did exist outside of counseling, it'd probably not be healthy.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
Well, I definitely have asked that question personally, so it's helpful hearing your perspective and like the client-focused priority that can trump having what in other contexts would be a normal, like, casual conversation. So
right. And like I said, there's like total gray area, like, so therapeutic rapport is really important. And so sometimes, like, what I learned in grad school, and I think this has been super helpful for me and other like peers of mine who are therapists, is like when we're about to self-disclose something, to ask ourselves, like, what is the purpose of me doing this? Is this for my benefit to feel better, in which case it would not be appropriate? Or is this for the client's benefit because it would benefit one of a number of different like elements of therapy? So just to check like our own motivations as therapists when we do self-disclose.
Yeah, that seems like a good question to get to that point. And requires a certain level of selflessness. Like, just recognizing this isn't about me right now.
Right.
We're not here for me.
Hopefully that's what every counselor signed up for. Hopefully.
Okay, cool. I hope that this was helpful for listeners to understand, maybe have a little bit of a, what am I trying to get at? Just a little bit more idea of what's happening, because we've referenced therapy, counseling throughout our show, and hopefully it seems a little bit demystified through that conversation. We did want to also just highlight some just other ways to explore like personal growth that are not some kind of or form of counseling. And two, with this, I just want to say, I remember from, I think it was that second episode that we did, I think I threw counseling out as like something that's easily accessible. And I just want to acknowledge, I realize for many people that's not the case. And I think it's unfortunate. I hope that there are more opportunities, like through community development or government funding or school funding, for people to be able to access it. Kind of because of that, we wanted to talk about some of these other methods for these other like personal growth channels. So one that came to mind for me was journaling, and I know that this might sound kind of basic, but truly, when in the seasons where I have committed to journaling and not put too many requirements on it, like just kept it really open-ended, it's been surprisingly helpful. It's something that currently I do every night before bed, and it can be just a few sentences. Sometimes it's just, I feel like this right now, or this thing happened today, or it can come out sometimes in the form of a prayer, like, God, there's brokenness here or in this person's life, in my own life, and I just am requesting that you would heal this or change our perspectives on it. And so it's amazing though, and I don't know, maybe external processors might find it less helpful, not sure, but for an internal processor, to get the words out of my brain and onto a paper that I can see outside of me, there's something about that act that just like, it's not magical, but it is kind of enlightening. Like, okay, this is what I'm focusing on right now, this is what's at the forefront of my brain. And it can be helpful to move on from it too. Like, okay, I wrote it down, I gave it its time, like I gave time to think about it, and now I'm gonna move on to something else, whether that's like reading a book or watching a show, reading my Bible, talking to someone. It kind of creates a boundary or a barrier. Anything you would add to that one, Lizzie?
I totally agree. Proponent of journaling. Yeah. It's taken on different forms for me across the years. Oh, one thing I was going to add is what's sometimes cool is to be able to look back, like, for example, like a journal 5 years ago and be reminded of different life circumstances, or to see like prayers answered. And I think particularly like just connecting this to mental health, like it's so easy for me to forget like how awful things were at certain points, and then to see the like growth and healing that has happened, and to be thankful for that. So it can be useful in that sense of like having a record. And although, yeah, that's just one thing, but yeah, I also agree. Like, I used to be much more like structured, like self-imposed rules around journaling when I was younger. But as I've allowed myself to just like say this journaling is my thing and I can do what I want with it, it can look, even if I write like diagonally on the page, which I have before if I'm laying on my side, like that's it. Like to feel the total freedom of that, or to have it be like poems and prayers and journaling and venting, and like I've enjoyed that personally, just letting it be.
Another one that we came up with is check-ins with friends, whether those are like a regular thing that is scheduled or just randomly as they're on your mind, or like as you feel like you need to talk to someone. And yeah, I think the ease of this probably depends from person to person. I think for myself, I've learned it's easier to have like a regular or something like somewhat scheduled with someone, to like look forward to it and like plan for it and stuff. I have a friend who will joke with me. She's like, all right, Andrea, I want to hang out sometime in the next like 9 months. So can you just like, can we get something on the calendar between now and like 9 months out? She's like super spontaneous, like would literally do something at the drop of a hat. Wouldn't care at all if I just called her out of the blue. But, and you know, I do that with some friends, and for me, like, I'm trying to grow in that, but I also can't hide the fact that I do prefer things to be scheduled, and I don't know exactly why that is, but there's like a sense of comfort in that. So regardless, I think just having those people that are go-to people, and like reciprocating where possible as well, just to like receive support and to receive love and grace when it's needed, and to give those things when it's needed. I think that can be a really huge thing.
Yeah. And that it interconnects. We were thinking about just the various forms of media, so like reading books, podcasts such as this one, and also the other like million podcasts. I recently heard that their Apple podcast has like past the 1 million mark on like the number of podcasts that are out there. So
I believe it.
I bet we tipped the scale. I bet we did.
We were the 1,000,001.
Audiobooks, music. For different people, it might like look different. What proves helpful, but a lot of like books, music, and podcasts that have been formative or super helpful for me, I've been recommended by friends. And so that's nice. I also constantly like send links to my friends and like
accurate
share things with people. So yeah, those can interconnect, but also as like a solo activity to be able to read or find music.
This is really, I'll be quick, but this is maybe an obscure note on the music thing. I think knowing what kind of music will like build you up when you need it, but also being aware of what kind of music tends to bring you down, like and avoiding that in times when you're already feeling low. Like I've learned, even pretty recently, I've learned there's certain genres or like artists that will put me in a mood. Like music has a lot of influence over my mood. At least on some days it seems like that. And so I've actually been kind of intentionally not letting myself listen to certain songs sometimes when I'm already feeling pretty down, to not like allow myself to draw that out any further. And I guess I don't want to say this is like a rule, but maybe just something worth thinking about. Like, it's not bad to feel like, to sit in sadness or grief or whatever. But like sometimes what I need in the moment, I think, isn't to hear another song that will make me continue to feel those things more deeply. And instead it's like, no, I need to call someone and like hear about their life and be excited for them. And like kind of crawl and draw myself up out of my own feelings, if that makes sense.
Yes, and amen. I need to hear that because I have a tendency to do that as well. I've been talking with, this is another quick tangent, but just talking with people recently, and this connects to just like as a therapist, being aware of different people need to hear different things. Like some friends need to be encouraged to feel their feelings because they push them down or are afraid of feeling them, or there could be numerous reasons someone doesn't want to feel whatever it is they're feeling deep down. Whereas I and other people have kind of the inverse struggle of like stewing and dwelling in feelings and like really marinating in them in an unhealthy way at times. And so I don't need to hear the word like, it's okay to feel your feelings. I need to hear like what you just said, like crawl out of your hole and see the sunlight and talk to someone and get out of your own head. So I appreciate that.
Great. All right, now I'm gonna awkwardly transition us from the therapy and counseling portion of this episode to our reflections on our podcast experience. So, this podcast has been in the works for a little over a year, and we started it out with a Google Doc that now has, I don't even know, do you want to guess
20.
how many?
Oh, I just looked.
Oh.
Shoot.
Nice. Okay, so it has like 20, I felt like there were more than that, topics.
Oh, sorry, 20 page. This is what happens when you cut people off.
It's 20
Lizzie.
pages. Okay, I was like, wow, I really highballed it in my head. Yeah, there are quite a few different
Probably
topics
35. I'm gonna look.
Yeah, that sounds more like it. That Lizzie and I, when we would think about it, we'd just kind of like add an idea for an episode to the doc. And in some ways it's sad because we feel like just a lot of those are going unexplored on this podcast, but it doesn't mean that they have to go unexplored in our lives. Mm-hmm. So hopefully we get to talk about some of that stuff. We also, quite a few of you actually helped us out at the beginning when we were picking what topics to do for episodes. We sent out a survey, and I think almost all of those we ended up hitting. But we prioritized the ones that got the most votes, and I believe the episode on singleness was the top vote episode. So it was kind of fun just to see what people were interested in. And one other thing I'll say real quick about the initial planning phase that was really fun for me, I think it was fun for you too, Lizzie, was the wordsmithing. So I don't know, probably a lot of you, I don't know, you may not even care about the description for our podcast or the little blurb we say at the beginning and the end, but we easily spent hours wordsmithing the heck out of those specific
thesaurus, dictionary,
the whole
9 yards.
We dabbled in the thesaurus. Yes, everything. We looked at other podcasts to see how much they said, how specific or non-specific they were, and it was really fun.
Yeah, we loved it.
It was fun to work with someone else who cares about specific words, was willing to talk for 30 minutes about whether we need to use an and or an or, that kind of thing.
Yes.
So that was part of our initial planning phase. That was pretty fun.
Yeah. Did we want to say researching? So our topics, for people who have listened to other episodes, some of our topics we have personal experience with or a certain modicum of expertise on. But other ones we did more intentional research, especially for the previous episode, and also just good to research generally and try to not be biased, that being a premise of our whole podcast.
One little blurb about our technological process. So my brother set us up with this software that we use to record, which probably nobody cares about, but in the process of learning this software, which I will add is very what would you say, Lizzie? It's incredibly technical.
It's very straightforward, but it's not necessarily user-friendly.
Yes, it's not totally an intuitive interface.
Yes.
And so, Lizzie, do you want to share about what helped us out a little bit with figuring that out?
So we just were searching. I think I did a Google search, and then I did specifically a YouTube search for tutorials on certain elements, specifically with mixing and editing. And we found this delightful man who whose name is Unfa. That's spelled UNFA for the visual learners out there. And I think he's Scandinavian of some sort. He has to be. He has a little accent, which only adds to his charm. I'm not crushing on him. It sounds like I am. And he also has long, flowing, straight hair. Which is beautiful.
Again, not crushing on him.
Totally not. But he did his own Ardor, which is the name of the software we use, tutorials and explained certain things, and that was just a fun surprise. Unfa, the Scandinavian man, teaching us how to use software.
And didn't you recently find him in another video?
Yeah, this one YouTuber I watch did this thing, and at the end of this thing, there was credits within the thing, Wow, that was really confusing. Basically, there are credits for part of this one YouTube video that I was watching, and Unfa was in one of the things, and he did something having to do with mixing the audio or like sound. I was like, yeah, it's my man, Unfa.
He knows what he's doing.
Yes, so he's famous, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so you mentioned this, Lizzie. We, from the get-go, we both wanted to provide like a fairly open-ended perspective on issues, and balance was a word that came up a lot. Mm-hmm. Like, we wanted to offer a balanced look at some of the topics we've covered. I think singleness is one where I felt like we were able to offer a good balanced approach. People might differ on that, but one thing that was hard, though, as we were trying to be balanced, and I've gotten some feedback on this from some people in my circles that have listened, is like the fact that you and I are both Christians, and that our faith is like it is central to like who we are and how we see the world. Mm-hmm. That's just something that inevitably impacted the way we talked about things and our perspective. And I do think we probably were not as balanced as we could have been in some episodes because of that. And that's not me saying that I didn't think what we were sharing was true from my personal convictions, but mm-hmm. like some of the feedback I've received is, well, of course you would reach that conclusion. Like, for example, when we were talking about like the misconceptions we've had about God. Well, even the word misconceptions implies that there are things that we got wrong about who God is, and not that God actually is that way or is mm-hmm. those things. And someone like highlighted that to me, and I appreciated that feedback a lot, because they were right. And there's, if we were to go forward with a second season, which we're not, this is not me like suggesting or implying that, but if we were, I do think I'd see a lot of value in having some people of different faiths, or who maybe don't really have a defined spiritual set of beliefs on the show, to like hear what they would say, because I think some of the critique maybe was just like there wasn't another perspective represented, so how can you call that balanced? And I agree. I think it's a valid point. So yeah, that's definitely something that I've thought about a little bit in reflection.
Yeah, there's like just a slight bit of an echo chamber going on. Mm-hmm. Although we did actively try to be aware of that and counteract that. I think there's a certain degree to which with any two people who share a number of convictions, that would be inevitable. So yes, definitely acknowledge that. Yeah, one cool thing as we have done the past 9 episodes, just like getting into a groove with how we do our episodes and getting more comfortable with each other. I think at first, anyone else who does a podcast or other like recorded speaking will be able to understand or relate maybe. Like, Andrea and I have had many, many conversations in our friendship, but something is unique about recording them. And so it took a certain level of like getting comfortable with each other in the context of recording, with a flow and like who's going to say what and when, and will it sound natural, will it sound scripted, and just feeling more comfortable as the episodes went on. And that was like a sweet thing to observe.
And avoiding the cheese factor. I was big on that. Like, I do not want us to have a cheese factor as much as is possible. Yeah, so as far as like, I don't want to spend too much time on this. This isn't like a pat ourselves on the back moment. But just like acknowledging that Lizzie, you and I are different. And we knew that before we did this episode, but I really do think it's one of the reasons, or before we did this podcast, but I think it's one of the reasons that it has turned out just as it has, and that it's been fun and enjoyable. And I think of the two of us, I tend to see like what's right in front of me and like what's concrete and kind of focus on that. And you were the one to often bring us to like a higher level as far as ideas go. And so I think there was a nice tension there of like, okay, so like here are the things we're dealing with right in front of us, but also on a grander scale, like bigger picture, this is what is going on or what we can think about. And one other like maybe more defined difference between us that hopefully has like made it more enjoyable for listeners is naturally you gravitate more toward emotions, like your own and others, thinking about them. And I gravitate more toward facts, and like sometimes I take a little bit longer to tap into the emotional side. But like the logic or understanding like what actually happened sometimes is where I tend towards. So I think it was good. We both got to practice seeing each other's point of view, and also hopefully like a more holistic view of the topics we were discussing.
Right. Yeah. Just want to give a quick shout out to like personality differences. What a weird thing to shout out. Like, so I'm thinking of like just really quick. I know we've talked about the Myers-Briggs in the personality episode we did, and how it's not necessarily super rigorous scientifically, but the two things you just said are kind of represented by two of the letters, S versus N, sensing or intuitive, and feeling versus thinking, F or T. And I think we have the inverse ones on both of those things. And sometimes people misuse like quote unquote types to say like, oh, well, if we're so different in this way, then we're not compatible, whether romantically or friends or whatever the context is. But I think it has so much less to do with that and more to do with like other more fundamental things. like
core values,
just priorities, values. So case in point, our friendship for both, if you're like an ISTJ and I like an ENFJ, and we can produce a cohesive podcast. Hopefully it's cohesive.
Hopefully we're not too blinded by our
our echo
bias.
chamber of our faith. I just to echo our personality episode and say like, as much as I love talking through types and stuff, particularly with the Enneagram, but also with others, like they aren't as important as sometimes we make them out to be.
Much to my regret, but you're right. to be totally transparent, I think one thing that draws me in about the Enneagram especially is like it seems to make sense of what otherwise is chaos in my mind, and it gives this probably false sense of control over like how I'm relating to different people or what our relationship dynamic is like. And like I don't want to use it as a crutch in that way, but I do think for me sometimes that's like why I want it to be everything. But you're very right. There's like so much more in a friendship, in a romantic relationship, in a family relationship. There's so much more than just a number. Otherwise, like basically everyone on the planet would be one of 9 kinds of people. And like
it would just like, it wouldn't account for the diversity that exists. It's like, okay, very clearly there are more than like 9 different people on the planet, so there's something else going on. We can safely say that much.
There's not a whole lot we can put our fists down on in this world, but that is one of them.
Oh man, that's good.
It's really not. Please don't print that on a magnet. Maybe just a last thing we'll highlight, and then kind of transition us to our closer. But we have both really enjoyed talking with you guys, our listeners, and we've loved the feedback, the honest feedback that we've received. A lot of you have suggested different topics for us to cover, and we got to cover some of those, and some of them we didn't. But I think if we had all the time in the world, we would want to. I know, especially from my friends at work, I got a lot of really interesting episode ideas that we just never really got to explore. But I'm really thankful for that. And I know at least a couple people have shared like that they sent a link to an episode to a friend or someone else. And I hope that even people outside our circles were able to be impacted positively because of this. But yeah, from the get-go, there's definitely a handful of people that have just been really supportive of us. And so I'm very thankful. Out. Yes, huge
There's a good shout
out. We don't judge shout out quality, but yeah, just very, very grateful. And I know I'm sad to see this come to a close. It's been really fun. It's been a great project and something to pour energy into and to learn more through. And yeah, I definitely am not going to regret the time that went into making this child, that, if you will.
Our baby.
That was really weird. I wish I would not have said it like that. But
I rolled with it.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess that's all I have to say. Did you want to say anything else, Lizzie? Or
no, I second everything you said.
Okay.
Thank you for putting it so beautifully.
Guys, thanks for tuning in to the last episode of Letting It Percolate. We hope that you connected with what we talked about in today's episode, and that your thoughts have been and will continue to be sufficiently percolated.